December 10th, 2019. We are starting today with a pre-council workshop, 1.1, Ordinance 2019-30, an ordinance amending the City of Moab Municipal Code, Section 17.31, RC, Resort Commercial Zone, to allow new overnight accommodations subject to revised development standards. And Nora, will you just set us up, please, with the expectation for today's meeting in terms of time and what you really need to hear from this council to be able to move forward. We have our public hearing tonight about this very item, and then it'll go back to the Planning Commission, correct?
Yeah.
So, real specific, how much time are we going to be here today? Are we here for an hour or two?
Hour and a half is what I think was noticed.
Hour and a half. So hard stop at 1:30. And what do you need from us?
Well, I think we decided we never have gotten down to past mixed use and height. We didn't talk last time about maximum building size, so I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. And then if the site and architectural standards. And I know there's work to be done with this, but I really was hoping to get some input from folks about what they like, what they don't like, what they understand, what they don't understand, so that I can address those comprehensively. And I did get a bunch of comments from Ronnie this morning.
Yeah, sorry I didn't get them written until now. But I didn't expect you to respond by now, so don't worry.
Not really ready to respond to those, but we can touch on them if you wish, and I can tell you where we are in the process. The last few weeks has been...
Well, okay. I don't want to interrupt you, but I feel like if we're going into, I just have a couple of things that I wanted to share.
Excellent.
Number one, I did have conversations after our last overnight accommodation about this idea of, feeling a little messy with doing the calculations. And I wanted to say just that this is a workshop. So there are going to be some figuring that we are doing, but I do want to respect the idea that we need to keep it at a higher level and let that figuring happen on a staff level and also with the Planning Commission. But at the same time, if we find ourselves workshopping a particular item, let's just, if anyone's feeling uncomfortable about either getting too far in the weeds or just feeling like this is not what this council needs to be doing, I just ask you to speak up about that, so that we can all be comfortable with the mechanism that we're using to get to our recommendations for this ordinance. Does that sound worth it?
Sure.
The other thing is that I did say at the last meeting that I would bring Orion to give a quick and dirty update on Greywater, as I know that's, no pun intended. That was a question, a kind of a prevailing question that we had. And so we do have Orion here. If we want to give him the mic for just 2 minutes, because definitely. He also had a really good meeting with staff this morning and can explain kind of as we're talking about commercial overnight accommodations and drafting this ordinance, what your recommendation would be. After the meeting, I had added for the council, I'd given them the wording that you gave me in terms of policy implication, but maybe that's a little different. Do you want to just come pull a chair right next to Nora?
Yeah. So one quick preliminary question. So Nora, in your agenda summary, under, we have energy and water, this and that, and I did notice you did talk about rainwater catchment, which we had before, but it looked to me like in that document anyway, the whole subject of gray water has disappeared.
It was never in the first
It was never in.
It was never in?
No, we never actually had it in any of our drafts, and I think we were kind of waiting to see the outcome of the recent efforts that have been happening in terms of gray water. Okay. So we can certainly add it if you wish, if it's ready for prime time. My most recent impression was that it may not be for commercial buildings, but I will let Orion address.
Okay.
All right. So I recognize most people here, but I'm Orion Rogers, the Environmental Health Director for the Southeast Utah Health Department.
Awesome.
Well, thank you. So where gray water is at right now is technically no. The current rule does not allow for gray water on commercial use. Myself and a number of other health officials and as well as the Division of Environmental Quality have spent the last 4 years rewriting the gray water rule for the state. That has been approved to go into the rulemaking process by the Water Quality Board as of a month ago or so. It has not entered public comment yet because a financial study of some sort that's required for rulemaking is in process of being put together for the final submissions of whatever needs to happen for it to go to public comment, after which the Water Quality Board would vote upon it to make it rule. At least that's how I understand it, but I keep finding more steps as we go. That all being said, the new rule, which seems to have plenty of support from the Water Quality Board, and I can't imagine that it would not be adopted, would allow for gray water use on commercial, on non-residential uses. So that would include commercial. I just finished up a meeting with Carly was there, as well as Barry, the building official, as well as county building official Bill Holtz and Zachariah Levine called in, and as well as health department staff, where we were able to identify some hurdles that could happen both with residential and with commercial uses, applications of gray water. One thing to consider, at least with commercial, like we can't utilize all of the gray water from a hotel. Like there's too much. So the idea to have them just utilize the gray water, enough gray water to feed their irrigation, to meet their irrigation purposes for the required landscape. But the other issue that came up too, because it's going to be important for city ordinances and county ordinances to be at least very similar for gray water use, because otherwise it'll make my job impossible, pretty much, and be hard on developers. It's not just that we need to look at gray water, and because we all agree gray water is a great thing, but we need to look at all of the policies that are dealing with their ordinances or whatever that are dealing with water usage and make sure that they're trying to meet the same goal. Because if the landscaping requirements require X amount of turf grass or X amount of this, and the gray water might not even be able to meet the needs of that landscape. So the kind of the end of that last meeting, and I think Curly agrees, we need to not only look at all ordinances and make sure that they're jiving with each other, and with the ultimate goal of overall water conservation through, and use gray water as one of those many tools, but gray water and rainwater catchment, as well as soil swales and all that kind of stuff. I guess that's kind of the gist of what came out of that, and maybe with this particular policy or ordinance, which I haven't read through all the way, I'm not sure what the language should look like, but as of now, we can't require people overnight accommodation to put in gray water, but if the language changed to upon adoption of state regulations that allow gray water, like we need to do something. It's hard to put the language together right here, but.
No, but that's helpful because I'm just adding this to a comment that I already shared with council. So upon adoption of state regs, something, ... overnight accommodation developments shall install rainwater and or gray water systems to provide sufficient irrigation for all the landscaping associated with the property. Could be a thing that we could move toward if the council wanted to. And that's something that could be then dictated by a bigger ordinance that needs to get worked out between you and the staff.
Yeah. And so there's just to be clear, there's two different types of gray water systems well, there's many different types of gray water systems, but there's two tiers. There's tier one, very simple, gravity fed, easy to do on a home. Then there's tier two, which would be something like a hotel or something greater than that, where it's going to require tanks and pumps, and it would be a system unto itself. And then then outside of the overnight accommodations, but other commercial uses, some of those commercial uses, we wouldn't want to have a gray water system under any circumstance. I mean, think about a mechanic shop, think about Synergy, Mega Blue. We don't want any of that going to gray water. I mean, there are certain types of uses that would be inappropriate. Therefore, there needs to be some sort of an exemption process. There's also going to be lots that are unbuildable that you can't put gray water on there. It may have a clay type soil, which would dictate the sizing of the gray water to be larger than would be accommodated by the property. So there needs to be an exemption process somewhere in there that dictates the feasibility of gray water and appropriateness of gray water.
So then, so adding upon state regs and including an exemption, if the health department says it's not feasible, then it's not a requirement, kind of thing.
Something like that.
So is that your judgment call? I mean, that is gonna be coming from,
It would be coming from the health department,
Okay.
on making a judgment call. One of our licensed environmental health scientists would be doing the review and making that call, and they would have the proper on-site wastewater certifications.
and is there a fee for that, even if you, let's say it didn't work out? I mean, are you charging the builder?
There would be, it would be essentially
Evaluation
a
fee or
plan
whatever.
review, a fee associated with it, that sort of thing. Because with these, they would essentially need to present a reason why, they would be the one presenting to us why they can't do it most likely. Because they would have an level 3 on-site wastewater certified, most likely engineer individual who would look at the project, and because in the commercial sense at least, on the residential stuff, the health department will provide that expertise. But in the commercial sense, they would have to provide design options to us, because we can't, it's gonna be all part of the mechanical engineer's job of designing everything, and then the stuff that's happening outside of the building would then be the level 3 person.
And then a guesstimate of cost related
It
ramifications?
would be very project specific. I have no idea.
I mean, like
I
any
mean,
sort of
for a
idea?
resident, okay, so for a residence,
Yes,
less than $1,000, probably significantly less than that. But for a hotel, it's significant. And in some cases with residences, it might not, if it's a 2-story building, it might not make sense to utilize all gray water, just everything that's on the main floor. So my thought would be that if, and I'll say, Graham County building officials opposed to requiring residential stub out for a multitude of reasons, and many of them, some of them are valid, and I can see where he's coming from on some of it, and it's just where do we find a good balance? But also, it's not that if we can just have it be partially gray water capable, that's better than nothing, right? If we can just get the laundry machine or just the shower.
Right, if a hotel decided to only use their laundry facility
Right.
for their gray water use.
And then that would probably be the easiest one, but then we have to consider what kind of soaps and stuff they're using in a commercial laundry facility. It's a little different, or do we just use the showers off of the basement? And so it might be, instead of just simply mandating that gray water and or rainwater are used, maybe another route that was suggested is saying, having a group get together to determine what our water use goal is. What are we trying to achieve? Our goal is to save water, right? And what's the best, most efficient way to do that? And then use gray water, rainwater, more appropriate landscaping, more appropriate road surfaces, channeling rainwaters in this direction or that direction to meet our ultimate goal, which is water savings. And how do we make all those things actually work together and have the ordinances reflected and mandated? Because some of the ordinances may even prevent, they might clash.
So Ryan, we're gonna move on. Thank
Okay.
you so much for sharing and talking. Oh, sure.
One complication. Are we talking about an incentive for hotels? All right, if they got lots of rooms, bathrooms, sinks. Are bathroom sinks in hotel rooms, do they qualify for gray water?
They would.
Okay, so Because sewer charges, okay, are based on culinary water consumption on a monthly basis for hotels. We've always basically made the assumption with them that all culinary water that's consumed by a commercial business goes in the sewer sooner or later. Well, here's an exception to that, right? So if we wish to incentivize businesses to do gray water systems, then we would either have to try to estimate in some fashion just 1 meter on all culinary water, just like it is right now, or 2 meters, which requires 2 sets of plumbing on the source side to all the sinks. So, any thoughts on that? Because that would
There are
be-
daily
yeah.
wastewater flow estimates for all sorts of different facilities like that, and really the bathroom sinks are, so little water's actually used in the bathroom sink, it's almost not worth even plumbing it. So it's estimated to be like 5 gallons a day in a residence, whereas the shower, there's estimates out there that can help with that.
I think I would say in response to what you just said, Mike, that if they're using landscape water anyway, they're already calculating a percentage of water not going into the sewer because of landscape, so. Does that make sense?
I'll think about that.
Okay, thank you, Orion.
All right, and any of you, just reach out to me with questions or concerns, just email or call or.
Thank you so, so much. All right, what are we doing?
Okay, so I made some changes as we had discussed in our last work session. I just cleaned some things up. I think we had a long discussion in our last work session, ended up with 80% of energy needs on site. And
Nora,
then
real quick.
Yeah, I was just, I mean,
Sorry.
I do apologize, but going back to our last workshop and the, throwing numbers out there, I did notice that there was the 5% commercial, the 80% energy. And I'm, like, after leaving the meeting, just feeling really uncomfortable that we don't have a sound justification for those numbers. And I think this is when we are looking to staff to direct us as to the pros and cons of those numbers instead of us just coming up here and going, hey, what feels good? And that's what happened on Monday. And so even with the 5%, I'm like, I don't know how we came up with that. And I need to know how to justify that, the numbers that we're throwing out, and I don't feel we have the backing or the studies or the.
Well, and I have an alternative to the 5% to kind of share with the council as
Okay.
well. If we're gonna have the opportunity today, or if we're gonna just focus on other. Nora, what do you think?
I mean, it's ultimately up to you guys what you want to talk about. I understand your point. It's like we don't want to be arbitrary and we don't want to appear to be. Some of it is based on sort of common practice. Like it's expected that most hotels have 5% sort of so-called commercial uses built in them already, and that's sort of a normal allowance. But when we come to the civic space and the open space, it is somewhat subjective. And what do we want to see as a city? What are the important things? And so we have to set those standards to see how, if we're getting what we want to get. So I suppose I could try to quantify, to rationalize those numbers, and I can go back and take a look at it. The concern that I've had over the past few weeks is that these work sessions have been great, and they help me a lot, but I don't really have time to do much in between, because we have a work session, and then I have to get the packet ready, like, within 2 days, and I also have to do planning commission packets, and so I haven't been able to respond to a lot of things, and I apologize for that. Some of it has to do with timing. But what I hope is, after this work session and after the public hearing tonight, to be able to really dive in and kind of clean up all the loose ends and try to maybe generate rational basis, because what I'm thinking is we probably have till the first week in January, because I don't think you folks are going to meet again, and the Planning Commission is probably not going to meet again after this week. So it'll give me a little chunk of time. I'm going away for a few days, but it'll give a chunk of time that I can actually work on it without having to deal so much with all the day-to-day stuff. So, so I just wanted to preface by saying that. So I don't know, I mean, do you want to discuss this concern that Karen has, or I'm kind of confused as to where to go.
I think one thing would, I'll let you speak, but one thing that would help me is I know you guys have a planning commission meeting, and I know there were things that they needed feedback on, and I just wanted to make sure we got to those things, and I think some of them were the site considerations, and I didn't know if we should start by addressing those so we at least get to those, and then if we have time, we circle back, but anybody can disagree.
Oh, I agree. I feel the meeting that I missed, it seems like you got to a certain point in the draft language, and then at our last workshop, we sort of went over the same ground. And I have more comments I can make on this, but it seems like maybe it would be better to start closer to the end and circle back if we have time.
Okay.
I agree.
Now, we didn't talk about square footage at the last meeting. Oh, one other thing, and I think this is a good point. Ronnie asked where the county is with all this. And that's a good question, and I have not been to one of their meetings regularly because they conflict with yours often, or with planning commission. So, but they are the planning commission is having a public hearing today. Their meeting starts at 5. I may try to go, but I suspect it's toward the end of the meeting, and it'll probably happen at the same time I'm supposed to be here. So, but anyway, they are having a public hearing tonight. And then I think the county council is having a public hearing on the 17th, I believe. So they're tracking similar. The standards are still fairly similar. There are some differences, a few differences, nothing really hugely substantive at this point in time. Again, once they get all their public input and we get all ours, I hope to sit down with Zachariah and kind of make sure that we're as close to on the same page as possible. So, okay. Yes, sir?
Okay, high-level question. Our city code currently contains Chapter 17.8, supplementary regulations for large-scale developments over 30,000. And it appears to have addressed many of the things that we're talking about in more depth than I've seen so far. And so I'm wondering if one strategy for getting to the end goal is to, like, maybe reference 17.8 and then, but make adjustments to it to address the lodging specific. If we want to have higher standards for lodging specifically, somehow incorporate that, but not reinvent this chapter.
Yeah, I mean, I know that chapter has a lot of, and it would apply, you know, and I guess it's not in here, but we talked with the planning commission about those standards applying also, and these would be above and beyond that if they are more restrictive, or where they are more restrictive. And I guess what you're asking me to do is to combine the two so that they're consistent, and we only have one set of regulations? Well,
I'm just wondering, I mean, it seems like these are much more developed than the draft that we have before us, and I'm a little concerned about the time, and so if we've already got this language, I just wonder if it's applicable enough that it would serve as a quicker starting point.
Well, that language has generated what we have today. So, I mean, I know that's relatively new language, but there are a number of projects that I'm not sure we're all real wild about that were subject to that section of the code. So, what we're trying to do is kind of improve on that a little bit, but and this may be more general rather than detailed. But we can certainly, I can take a look at that and try to make them, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's more a question. I don't know what you or the planning commission has done in regards to considering this strategy, and you could just, I mean, the answer is, oh, we looked at that and rejected it because, and that is a fine answer as far as I'm concerned, but I hadn't heard about it.
Well, all we talked about was that both would apply, the most restrictive of each would apply. So where this is more restrictive, it would apply, or where that is more restrictive, it would apply. Because that applies to any building in any zone. So it's a little bit more broadly applied. But again, if we prefer some of that language over this language, I haven't gone back and, we actually did a comparison. And I can send that out because we did a point-by-point comparison of the two. I had Corey do that.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that in any event.
But then, in conclusion to that comparison, you came up with these standards?
I just wanted to make sure that these standards were not totally different than those standards.
Or less restrictive?
Yeah. Okay, I will send that out. But for purposes of this meeting, what I guess I'd like to do is just get your preliminary feedback on the standards as they're written today, and then I can go back and look at the items in, we've already done it in that comparison, and bring any others in that are more restrictive, so that there's at least that consistency. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
right, and if you've already done this work, I'm not asking you to redo it, and maybe just
No,
sending me
we've
the
done it, so-
documentation of what you've done will be, I'll say, great. Onward.
Okay, you can do that.
You know what, Nora, if I may, if it's not too much trouble, if you, for example, could send me a copy of this, of the draft legislation itself that I can comment on, or even better yet, the way you can edit as a suggestion or something like that, so you can keep, I don't know, something like that. It will give me a chance to read through it and take a few hours, I think, for me, to kind of digest it, because I'm always uncomfortable. Yeah, this sounds good to me, saying here off the top of my head. And that way I can get back to you with those written comments there, and I think I'd do a better job of it if I could do it that way.
This is exactly what was in your packet.
Okay.
But I understand that it takes time to review those, and we've had pretty short time frames here, so.
Okay.
That is absolutely fine, and if we want to go over those and then have you folks respond back to me later, that's totally fine too.
So both the documents that you attached to tonight's meeting then, are they commentable, or, can I?
Oh, I can send you a Word version if you want me to.
Are you thinking about like a Google Drive, like, version that
Yeah, I
you can
think-
comment on, just like our
think you
shared
can comment
comment
on
sheet or
anything.
something? Just a
Yeah,
version.
maybe you don't need to do anything, and maybe all I need to do is comment on those documents, if I can do that, and make sure you know about my comments. Maybe you don't need to do anything, but just a resource for me, then that would be great.
Well, again, I need some guidance from you as to whether you want to do it in a Google Doc or whether I just send you all a Word version and you make your comments and then send them back to me, or.
Well, I really like having a shared document
Docs,
on the drive where we see each other's comments, but it seems like then we have to police ourselves. And we've recently been cautioned about that.
So that they're not opinions.
Well, because
they're-
here's the deal. This is our opportunity we had this document, we write down our comments, and here's our opportunity to deliberate. So I think what you're saying is you still want more time to review and another chance to deliberate.
Yeah, well, so let me ask a more straightforward question. That's a great question. So if you were to make this document shared to all of us, and we could tentatively edit it with suggestions for any text changes and comment in the whole 9 yards, and you'd get that kind of stuff from all of us, which necessarily is obviously going to reflect our opinions and so forth. Is that deliberation that we can't do then?
If you're just,
At the point is that this is our time now to deliberate in an open and public meeting and be able to share our feedback that we've had on this document. And then if we feel like we need more time, then we'll set another meeting.
You're walking up to a line. I mean, if you're just putting your comments on there and your opinions on there, and you're not then commenting back and forth on each other's opinions and having discussion, it's when you get into discussion that you run into problem. If someone makes a statement that says, I think this should be 26, and none of you comment on it, and staff then takes that and we work with it and we're running with it, that's not a meeting. If Mike says, I think this should be 26, and Kaylin's response is, no, it should be 43, and Karen's like, I'm more on 43, and then Ronnie's, that's now a meeting because you're discussing what needs to be in there. If it's just opinions and staff is responding and working off of your opinion, that's fine.
But how could we not, if
You're walking a fine line when
Yeah,
you start doing that.
share an opinion and then people not share their opinion if they disagree with
Isn't
you?
it better to just have questions and not opinions?
I think I think I understand the rationale behind wanting a document where everybody can see everybody else's comments. But as Joel said, you're kind of getting up to a line we want to keep you from crossing for lots of reasons. And mainly because we want to make sure that your deliberations are open to the public. And so if there's conclusions you're coming to or things that you are deciding, it's not happening not in a public way. So I think the best thing to do is if Nora sent you a document and you had specific comments you wanted to write on it, and you sent that document back to Nora and she was able to look at those and incorporate some of those and present that at a public meeting, I don't think there's any issue with that. I think creating another public document where everybody's commenting collectively, it could get to the point where you're potentially discussing it. It's tempting to respond to other people's comments, and it just invites deliberation. And as Joel was saying, you cross the line into discussion and deliberation, and that's where you get into a problem where, someone could argue that the decision didn't happen in a public meeting and they want to try and invalidate it.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is, the hard work of the public should be done with the public. That's the main reason. We want to comply with policy. This is an area of policy that is highly litigated and highly challenged. And we're doing some things in this area right now that necessarily haven't been done in the state of Utah. So we're trying to lay a record that when we get challenged, that it will uphold. We're not just, there's multiple reasons for why we don't want to have those discussions. One being is we want to comply with the Open and Public Meetings Act. Two being, when this stuff gets challenged, we don't want there to be a second record.
Yeah, I understand that. All right, so Nora, I just took your draft ordinance as a link to it appears in our council thing, and I just clicked to see if I could comment on it. I cannot. I can't do anything to it.
The
So
PDF? Yeah, the
The
PDF.
PDF, yeah,
you
you
can't
can't
comment
yeah.
on a PDF, so I can certainly, well, you can.
Yes, you can, but not on this particular PDF. I'm
Right.
not sure why. So if you could get me either a Word or a version that's just local to me, nobody else sees my comments, they're just directly between you and me, I'll take it on as my hot action item between now and tonight. You may not have time to, but make my action item to think about it. And I will go home and
Okay.
give it some considered thought. If you can share me a document, let me know by email.
Sure, so are you more comfortable with a Google platform document or a Word document? Either one would work for me, whatever you're most comfortable with. I could send out both.
I don't want a document to comment.
Okay.
A Google shared doc is fine with me. I mean, I know how to do it. Whatever's easiest for you, as long as I can comment.
Okay.
And I'll just tell the rest of the council what I did. I just took our shared question sheet and I put in a bunch of questions I had because I know some of us have the same questions. Like one of my questions is the one Karen asked earlier. But I just, if I found I had an opinion, I just put that on a separate list to bring up at the meeting. Hopefully, if anybody had the same questions, that'll help someone else.
Okay, so let's start going through these standards on G, which is site configuration.
Did we cover F at our last meeting?
Not really. We talked about it at our meeting before. So this is what the Planning Commission recommends, and so the maximum building size is proposed is 20,000 square feet. The maximum gross square footage of a project would be 40,000 square feet. We already talked about the building height maximum being 30 feet or 40 feet if they have a, and then there would be an exception for the maximum building sizes we discussed before that could go up to 60,000 square feet if we get some great commercial or additional affordable housing above and beyond the assured workforce housing. So that's what the recommendation is. The county is similar. They are 15 and 50, I think, or 15 and 40. It's within 10,000 square feet. And again, they're having their public hearing, so that might change, but that's what they're proposing at this point. If a building is developer chooses to develop commercial, over 5% of gross floor area. In other words, more than just the incidental things that are usually in a hotel. The project size could be increased by the gross square footage of the commercial use not to exceed, I need to put this in here, not to exceed 20,000 additional square feet.
And then there was some discussion about 1-for-1.
Yeah,
Nora, a quick
that's
question.
what this basically says.
Quick question, do you think they chose 15 versus 20 because, whatever, when we look at some of the examples, at Bowen and the Apache, they were thinking that size plus, whereas we're going zone by zone, they're trying to do the overlay. If they're laying out their standards for all of the county, that was a good number to start with?
They have actually they break down theirs into two pieces.
Okay.
They have sort of the more out of town and the more kind of urbanish one.
Oh, okay.
And I believe their recommendations, at least yesterday I looked them up, I think their recommendations for both on the square footage is the same. So there are some other differences, much like will be in our code, that has to do with interaction with the public and pedestrian activity and stuff like that we'll get into when we get to the C2 and C3. But they are proposing close to this for both of their kind of areas. The other thing that they are working on is, since they're doing overlays, they're trying to define sort of opportunity zones or where someone could apply. So they're trying to narrow it down a little bit so that it's just not, anybody with any commercial property can apply. So they are trying to do that. There's some pushback on that, I think, but they have been discussing that as well and working through that.
Okay, do you or other staff think it's really important that our 15 and our 20 and their 15 be the same, or is that close enough?
I think it would be best if we were consistent. If there's a slight difference, I don't think that's a huge big deal. They are not adding the incentive for mixed use. And I think that's a kind of a key component of ours, and I think that's okay, because I think it applies to the North Corridor, which is a kind of unique situation.
Right. I was going to add that this isn't the resort commercial.
Right. So that's where they're at with that. So do you guys want to just leave this as it is until we have the public hearing? Or do you want to make changes? Tawny wants some visual examples, which I actually have collected some photographs of what some of these things look like.
So the additional commercial use would be subject to the current large-scale commercial regulations, which was drafted to sort of address the concerns about big box development, correct?
Well, not necessarily. So those regulations are really related to avoiding the typical big bucks. Mm-hmm. These are kind of more finely tuned for hotels and motels primarily. So, if a building is over 40,000 square feet, they basically have to meet both criteria. If they have a building that's 60,000 square feet for a hotel and another building that's 20,000 square feet for a market or something, then that building wouldn't be subject to they would be subject to these regulations, and not necessarily the over 30,000 square feet regulations, because that's not really what that's for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sort of. So do you want to render an opinion on these numbers, or do you want to wait to hear from the public? They should be right here, too. aren't
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
I feel comfortable with it as is, moving on. But what does the rest of the council think?
For now, I'm comfortable to go to public hearing, and if we find we have to come back to it after that, I'm okay with that.
Well, I'm probably comfortable with the 20,000 square foot only because your table of existing hotel
Yeah.
sizes are by and large much larger than those. So that's, I mean, that's an improvement, I
Yeah.
guess is what I'm trying to say.
And it breaks it up. So, I think one of the big concerns is that we've got some pretty massive square buildings. And we'd want to try to avoid that.
So Nora, on site configuration, if I may?
Yeah.
Are we, sorry, are we
we on
moving
the
on?
sub-
Does everyone feel comfortable
Well, I
moving
would
on?
just, I don't know if we need to talk about it now, but just the 5%. Again, we threw that out there on Monday, and I am not necessarily convinced that is the number. I would
So-
really,
Yeah, I totally disagree with that
Okay.
number, but.
Can I explain that a little bit? So what we're saying is, you can get an incentive up to 60,000 square feet of accommodation units if you provide up to square foot by square foot additional commercial space. But that's above and beyond what's normally in a hotel. In other words, if you're going to put a little gift shop and a grab and go, which normally a hotel might have, that wouldn't necessarily count, so that you couldn't get extra rooms based on that. So you get 5% if you want to use it. If not, that's fine. But then it's above and beyond that you get the incentive for. So what I'm trying to do is not incentivize what normally is in hotels. I'm trying to incentivize additional commercial. So so we don't want to give them credit for those kinds of commercial uses that are normally associated with a hotel that everybody always does.
okay.
We're trying to get kind of beyond that.
Yeah.
And 5% is a number that is not unusual when you have a hotel or to have a maximum of 5% of floor area you can have as commercial. I just don't want to include that in the calculations for incentives
Gotcha.
because it's kind of normally associated with it anyway.
Okay, I guess I was confusing it with our requirements that we're asking for the hotels. So that's good to know.
And I
Okay.
can make that more clear.
Okay.
Forgive me for backtracking one moment, but 5% of building footage for open, well, my question is how, in D above, sorry about that, usable open space. When I was on County Planning Commission, open space, as I recall, included landscape areas, streets maybe, I don't know. I mean, it was a pretty fair envelope of stuff. 5%, and typically those numbers in residential subdivisions were much bigger. I want to say 20, 30%. In fact, you got a bonus if it was more than 30%. 5% is an awfully small number. So what sort of, like a parking lot in a hotel, does that qualify as
No.
usable open space?
Did you see the definition that's in section 1? It may or may not help your question.
Okay. Okay, so you're comfortable with that? Sorry to ask.
I don't know. I feel like the civic space and the open space thing, I mean, we're still working our way through that, just like the list of, community commercial uses, but maybe that answers your question about parking lots.
Okay. Yeah, forgive me, Nora, for being behind the 8 ball
No, that's
right now.
okay.
I've kind of been
Yeah.
weird this week,
I
so.
totally understand, believe me. Open space is one of those that we've had a lot of discussion about, both the county and the city. We don't necessarily want large areas of landscaping that needs a lot of water.
Yeah,
So if you require 30% open space or 40% open space, is that area just going to be,
what's it good for? Is what you
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why we sort of went with the usable thing. But the number can certainly be adjusted, and I can.
Okay, that's okay. What do you think on it?
Just as a reminder, what would be the normal percentage of open space one would be required to put in? I was just wondering how this compared to, without these standards, what you would have to put in.
Well, this says 5%, but we certainly could up that. It's just that we need to define what that wants to look like.
No, I just wondered currently, like if I build a hotel, are there any standards that require me to put in open space and what the percent is? You can look it up later.
Yeah,
I just was thinking I should find out what that was.
Summer, do you know?
In the resort commercial, there is a percentage that's required.
Yeah,
with
there is.
Development already, but in commercial zones, not necessarily.
So can we go down and start with the site configuration?
Yes, I think so.
Just so I can get at least some preliminary feedback.
Well, and it might be worth it to just say to the council, like, edits or suggestions of different things to section G? Or are we a thumbs up?
For G1, I'm wondering if a better way to say it is to say that final grade shall not vary from existing grade by more than X feet. Because someone may choose to grade a flat building site that cuts into a hillside and then regrade it when they're done. So it seems like the final product is what is the concern.
And that's what our hillside ordinance does, and the hillside ordinance would still apply, but we can refer to that or add it as emphasis.
What else in section G? I was just a little like the fronting street again. We have a frontage road. I don't know about,
That would be the fronting street.
yeah, it's just, if the development were to not face the frontage road or be on a flag, I think I made this comment before, that maybe that's not as,
Seems more important to the C2, C3.
yeah, and like that, that I'd rather give the developer flexibility on that one. Because they're gonna orient themselves to catch the eye of the people driving by anyway.
And isn't that used,
I'm so
that
sorry.
sort of building technique to encourage pedestrian walkability and?
Somewhat, but it's also because you don't want to see the backs of buildings when you're coming down the highway into town.
Oh, okay.
Because it's all, you know,
Yeah.
and so you want them to be forward-facing. It doesn't matter as much,
So-
obviously, for a flag lot.
Well, and the example too is the, we have a prime example of it not facing the front at the Hilton. I think I'm dying, but across the bridge and to the left, if you think about it, that hotel is not facing the road. It's just facing the parking lot.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
So so I'm gonna go get some more water here, but that's my comment.
I think I had a related question, Nora, and I think it's more just something to reflect on, but I don't know if you have any comments as I was going through about, so we have the requirement, I think later about, or somewhere else, about parking, to the side or to the back. And I was trying to think through that and I was like, I see pros and cons of that because it's easier to access certainly from the sidewalk, when the parking's in the back of the slide. Some people can argue parking's ugly and stuff and the cars coming and going are more visually distracting. But then I thought, I guess for the user, especially when you're on the highway, it might be a little more pleasant because you're a little farther away. And in terms of view shed, maybe it pushes the building, well, on the downslope side, more from inhibiting the view shed, but on the uphill side, it's not as great. So I was just wondering, what pros and cons one considers with all that, because, but is the idea of the parking on the side or the back kind of similar?
That's already in the code, actually.
Okay.
So That's just so, again, when you're driving into town, you
Yeah.
don't look at a sea of parking.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of, that's some pretty basic kind of urban design standard stuff anymore.
Yeah.
So that, you know, you don't have a use, you don't see a sea of parking right in front.
So when I think of examples, should I think of that more like right now we have, say, the Hampton Inn and they have parking, it's not all in the back, but it is kind of on the side of the back. But if I go past, I don't know if it's the new Hyatt by the Sunset Grill or the old Riverside Inn or the Super 8, they all have their parking in front, right? So, okay.
So Noreen, if I make a general question about your criteria under site configuration, and this is in part, Laurie and Carly and Joel, a legal question. Here we go, conditional uses again. So if we apply these things and an applicant comes in and let's just say that he's, I mean, I'm protective of the view shed, okay? And you've got some language in here in number 1, for example, that tries to do just that. But it's pretty subjective language the way it's written right now. It doesn't have hard numbers on there, and that is both a good and a bad thing. It's bad and it's not quantitative, so it's hard to say, yeah, it does or doesn't apply. But it at least gives you some flexibility, which I kind of like, but it opens the door. What happens if somebody comes in with something that really appears to be, for whatever the reason, objectionable from a view shed point of view? And they say, oh, well, we didn't do any mass grading. Are we, the council, then legally obligated to accept the application on the grounds that he made some sort of an argument, even though we may think that it's not as good as we would like, to accept the application? Or can we just flat say, no, redesign the building?
So there was discussion about requiring a view shed study and perhaps requiring, allowing on the downhill side when you're coming into town to maybe allow it some additional building height.
Yeah.
But where we got with that whole discussion was we went back to limiting the building height to 30 feet.
Right.
Unless unless there's something that we want that you're giving, and then you get more. So rather than have kind of specific view shed regulations with numbers and things like that, we decided to decrease the building height, basically, to try to deal with the view shed issues. And if you think about it, this is one of those things where if practically we look where our RC zone is, what we don't want is 3 stories immediately adjacent to the road without adequate setbacks, just right there, because that's the Wingate or some of the other ones that are objectionable for that reason.
So you're basically making the argument here that, well, actually it could be 40 feet. Suppose that they qualify for the incentives and they can put in 3 stories and 40 feet. So you're basically making the argument that even on any place in town, certainly in the RC zone that's under consideration now, even if they're on the east side of the highway and you're going up, that 40 feet, no matter where they place it on their site, won't be an objectionable obstruction of the view shed.
Yeah, and if you drive into town, we're requiring, well, the road's going to be wider, and I think most of the properties on as you're coming into town.
To the right or lower and to the left or
Right, the ones
higher.
that are higher,
Exactly.
in general, the backdrop
Sure.
is much higher than 40 feet. So, and if it's set back from the roadaways, then it wouldn't necessarily block the view shed because the rim is higher. The other thing that I put in here in the building design was that the first floor has to be a pedestrian scale for at least 15
Right.
feet and then step back. So that will help some of that as
Can you
well.
remind me, is that on the west side or both sides?
It's on both sides.
Okay.
Yeah. We talked about doing different for the east and
Yeah,
west.
I thought we had one hotel that came in, you guys may remember, it's already vested, that was on the east side, and the plan showed a switched back driveway going up the hill, and then they were gonna park the hotel itself up, quite a ways above the roadbed. And just from the plans, I thought, oh, that is gonna look ugly. That's what I basically thought. And so I don't know how you guys feel about that, but
Well,
maybe I'm getting all bent out
we've
of
seen
shape about nothing.
the Hyatt, is higher, and the casitas that were built are higher. So the question is
You
that,
don't miss the Moab rim behind it.
right, so that satisfies your concern?
Well, I think you're addressing, it's like when Johnson's up on top came up years ago, people were concerned about people building over the top of the rim. And
Right.
you're talking more about that, I think, because it's higher, there's no way anybody's going to get over the top of the rim. True, but if this is a roadbed and the ground goes up here, and you're going to have 40-story building up here,
40-story
40-foot
would
building.
definitely block the view.
Yeah, no,
I don't think the hillside development would probably allow that,
Right.
right? Because of the slopes,
maybe
We
Nancy.
don't have, right now in our code, at least that I found, it could be in there somewhere, we don't have we don't have anything that requires a visual impact study and that identifies, there's language in the general plan for sure, and we want to maintain the Moab rim and view of the Moab rim. When you start talking about viewshed studies, which are certainly commonly requested, you kind of have to decide from where and what specific view you're trying to save. And that's something that we could add. We have chosen not to at this point in time because we're hoping that most of the buildings will be 30 feet, some will be 40.
Well, Ronnie has a good point about the hillside development. My only caution is here, we just essentially threw it all out the window, all right, when the Hamptons Inn over here wanted to level their parking lot behind there. And if the council is conducive to doing that, then I have a feeling that if I, for example, felt strongly about where they were building, the rest of the council said, oh, great, don't worry about it. So I don't know, I'm a little concerned about that, but I will let it go for the moment. Okay.
I understand. Okay.
Number 10, again, I just have some questions about parking. And we don't have a cap on parking, and so is there anything to restrict somebody from, let's say, not doing, having more natural landscaping and just paving, asphalting the whole area? I think that there should be some kind of limit put on that. And then also, looking at some examples, the Hoodoo is a good example of how they broke up their parking, and I think that's more attractive than just,
One big lot.
a super huge, large parking lot.
We do have, so our parking lot design regulations would continue to apply, which says you have to have, islands every so many spaces, and there has to be at least one major tree. And so we have some pretty specific design guidelines right now for parking lots. But if we, I haven't heard this council talk so much about parking maximums. It's something that we can certainly talk about, and I'm not necessarily opposed to them. But in fact, I'm kind of supportive in the downtown area. Out there, it's a little bit different because it's not like, it would be very difficult until we have some kind of a shuttle system to not have a car if you're staying in the North Corridor. So you kind of have to provide the parking that's needed. And then there's also a potential need for oversized parking for your guests. Mm-hmm. So if it's up to you guys as council if you want to put a maximum. Arriving at that number, again, I don't know how to make it. The number, we would have to make an exception to our parking requirements somehow. And that is not built into this at this point in time, but if the council as a whole feels strongly, we can certainly do that.
Oh, I don't even know that our current parking is adequate for, the hotels as it is, but this is just, it's the entrance into our city, and to have some of that just turn into, concrete or asphalt parking lots would be sort of a shame.
It would be.
So that's the only concern, and I don't know if it's feasible to to figure that out.
I mean, we're requiring it to be to the side or to the rear, which I think helps. It has to be broken up
Yeah.
according to our current landscape requirements. I just don't know how to, I'm trying to figure out how to craft language that would put a maximum, and what we would base that on. It's the same kind of discussion that we've been having.
Well, let's put that in the, like, consideration.
Okay.
So that Nora,
Okay.
after public hearing stuff and after they're looking through it, can come back with maybe a suggestion or maybe it's gotta be.
Right.
Okay, we've
Okay,
got
thank you.
2 more sections ahead.
Okay.
We have building design and we have materials and colors. So maybe 10 minutes on design, no more than 10 minutes on design, and no more than 10 on materials and colors, so that we can
Okay.
at least get through it. So, Council H, building design, any comments?
So Nora, I think you already answered it, but just going back to H4, which is the one that, references the need for single-story element before a second-story element. I'm pretty sure, but granted, I haven't looked at a topo map or something. When you drive north on the west side, we generally drop down. Is there any kind of scenario where someone would get, I don't think so, but with their setback, their front setback, and then their one-story building, and then I think the 15 feet that they need if we're going to two-story, I'm pretty sure by then you've moved far enough west that you aren't going to be high enough that you're obscuring, the rim view. But I think with view shed, that's what a lot of people, first think of is when I'm driving north, can I see the rim? And just because of the one development now that's so clearly obscuring it.
Which is what?
I always get the names of them confused, but
Gate, I think.
yeah.
The one out there? The one
Yeah.
south of town?
Yeah. Well, it's the most noticeable when you're driving along, looking at the rim. and
North of
things
town,
breaks up.
as you're driving into Moab, the large new development, it's what is it?
Timeshare, I thought.
It's the timeshare.
The Wyndham.
Oh,
And to the right, what Ronnie's referring to is, we used to be able to see the portal, and now you can't, because there are buildings that are there and up.
Well, anyway, when I talk to people about view shed, that's the example, one of the examples they tend to use. But I'm just wondering, I'm assuming with the setback, the front setback, you've got your one story, then you step up to 2. By the time, you're building that second story building, you're far enough west from the highway that you're probably not going to be obscuring that view shed. But I was just going to double check if there was a scenario where that still could be.
that's the goal.
Yeah.
And that's why we structured it this way. But I couldn't tell you for sure. And
Yeah.
it depends on what you're trying to preserve, which we'd need to identify. If maintaining a view of the opening, the portal, if that's one of your main goals, then we'd have to write view shed requirements that discuss that specifically, which we could do. I don't know if I can do it in a week, but it might be something.
You know what, that's a great question. Does this council want to have something worked in this resort commercial, and probably the next zone as well? Some type of portal view shed preservation that she and the staff and planning commission can work on? Since that's been feedback about the existing hotel getting built.
That's a great idea. I want to go out there and drive out there and look and see. I didn't really think about the timeshare.
I heard that comment, and I looked, and I thought, well, I guess I'll just see the portal in between buildings, is what I thought. And so that wasn't a concern of mine, but if the council wants to, and what Ronnie's saying is, then we can ask that.
Yeah, I'm personally interested, but I don't know if anybody else is, only because I hear from residents and visitors. One of our responsibilities is look out for the long-term appeal and feel of the community. And if, it just kind of adds to our reputation of selling out if we just slowly cover that up with the patchwork. But
Well, and I don't think, if a building is going to block the view of the portal, and, you're going to have to allow something on a site. So in some cases, it may be view corridors that we're really interested in, because there may be some sites that if you put a two-story building, it could block the view for a period of time, you know, as you're driving by. Anyway.
So does this council want staff to work on a
That's, I mean, I think
portal?
that is, I love that, but just like you said, it could be very subjective, because you move 30 feet and then all of a sudden it's opened up again.
Right, and you know, I've developed view shed requirements before, twice, and it's really important to identify exactly what you're trying to save and from what vantage points, very specifically. And then you can, you know, base your requirements off those specific things. And if it's the portal and the Moab rim, you know, that's something that I could look further into.
I'd like that. I'm concerned that
I think it's mentioned in the general plan, yeah.
Yeah, it does, absolutely, and
that we can get developments where it is continuous buildings, even though they're broken up. Like, it seems like the World Mark does that more than I necessarily expected, and you get more of those, then those view corridors become very small potentially. So, and that just goes back to how the buildings and the parking gets configured so that it's worked into all the other factors in designing the site.
Okay, so we'll get back on that. What else? What else in building design?
a lot of this is consistent with or slightly more strict than the requirements for over 30,000 square foot buildings that we have already in our code.
Okay, should we move on to materials and colors?
You know, I don't think much of this stuff would be terribly objectionable to a hotelier, and adds a little, just adds some features that we would like to see to break up the mass more. Okay, here's some more. Talks about, and so the wall, the blank wall, and an exception if the wall is going to be used as a mural, not a sign. But there was concern that we didn't want to preclude that. There's information about rooftops and screening. Plastic or vinyl awnings are not permitted. Awning types and colors for each building shall be coordinated. Some of those little things make a really big difference. Like if you have a really nice building and then you tack on a bright blue vinyl awning, it can kind of wreck it. So that's why the awning is in there. And then shutters, we can leave that in or take it out, whatever you prefer.
Oh, I was just going to ask, I mean, just because I've never read about shutters, so clearly shutters are an issue, huh?
Well, you know, most of the shutters are purely decorative, and you know, there's no way that they will actually cover the window, and it's subjective whether you think that's a good look or not. I tend to not be wild about the shutter thing, and this is from another ordinance, so.
Okay.
It's a hot topic at the county.
Oh, okay. I think I'm shutter indifferent.
It is?
But
They're not gonna pass anything much.
They are supporting this,
Yeah.
which I was surprised, frankly.
So anything else before we move on to materials and colors? Okay.
Materials and colors is pretty basic.
my one question was on the sentence, other durable materials will be considered as technological improvements are made. I wasn't really sure at what phase does one make technological improvements. I just wasn't sure, new materials, I guess, sometimes come up, and
They do all the time.
with climate, and I don't know, if people are trying to do efficiency. So I just wanted to check, not knowing when that phase came up, does that leave enough flexibility? As those things come up, as more efficient things come up, that they could be considered in future if they aren't on this list now.
Yeah, and that happens all the time. For example, back in the day before hardy board was commonly used, I remember getting the first application for hardy board, and we didn't address it in our code at all, and it wasn't a permitted material. But the state of the art changes. And people are coming up with all kinds of new materials, whether it be energy efficiency or whether they be visually appealing. And the main point is that we want them to be durable. And we're willing to consider other materials as technology changes, because it really does change pretty quickly in the building world. There's always new stuff coming out, so.
So most of our hotels are stucco,
Yes, they are.
but stucco is not listed, but I assumed Adobe type materials is stucco. I just was wondering what stucco was. I wasn't even gonna make the comment, but now I did.
Well, stucco, you're right, it's not on there.
It's not, I just figured somebody was like, oh, let's call it Adobe type. But was that the intention? Adobe type is stucco?
Let's talk about stucco. The way it's written right now, stucco can be used for accents, but not necessarily the primary building materials. We could add it. What I want to get away from is that there are some stucco, again, stucco is one of those things that have various different qualities, and they're all called stucco. So there's sort of traditional stucco, which is really quite durable, but what most people are using these days is a EFIS.
The synthetic, isn't it?
It's a system, yeah, it's synthetic stucco, and it's not durable. And so my concern is if somebody says that's stucco and puts it all over a building, it's not gonna last, especially in our climate. In my opinion, I lived in a building that was EFIS, and within a year, they had to go back in and redo a bunch of stuff. It just doesn't, it's just not very durable. I don't know what else I can say. But we can put stucco back in there.
I did not realize it was excluded. I absolutely would want that permitted as a primary building exterior material.
Well, this is a perfect lead-in, so I'm just curious if, let's just say the economy sort of tanks and people aren't staying at hotels and they're not making as much money, what are we doing? Because stucco fades, it starts cracking. If they do not have money to fix all these hotels that we have built, is there anything in code that is going to require people to upkeep their buildings?
I believe we have maintenance requirements somewhere in the code, but
I mean, obviously, you always have building inspection, and you can get buildings that dilapidate to the point that they run into condemnation issues, but obviously, you're saying we want to have something in there before we get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, just regular maintenance. I mean, there's some examples of older buildings that we have now that, I mean, again, it's this representation of what we're creating here, and are we going to be able to sustain that? So
we do have, in the building code has abatement procedures. So if if it's not being maintained in such a way that that it presents a danger to the public or to the residents, then there are abatement procedures that can be done. Those don't happen very often, but
could we create stricter? I mean, be not just a health reason, but actually an aesthetic.
yeah, the cushion shop. Well, that's a little different.
For what it's worth, that's wood. Wood is our most dangerous exterior building facade in this climate, not stucco. And I mean, just, yeah.
So if I may, Emily,
Okay.
I have one more thought that'd be great for me, but I don't know if, you don't have time to do this today, but all this draft code, every item, materials and colors, 1, 2, all these little things in here, what would be really nice to me would be to have staff tag each requirement by a single number. One might be, your typical developer will have well, not only will they not have no objection, but this is already standard practice. Okay, in other words, the code looks like it's a requirement that may or may not be aggressive, but your typical builder won't pay any attention to it because he's already doing it. Okay, so that might be one. It's already in use. I mean, it's a standard that's widely accepted industry practice already. 2 might be, yes, this is new, but it's doable, okay? 3 might be doable with some expense. 4 might be objectionable, that the builder might object to it because it's, for most purposes, an unrealistically expensive proposition for him. He can't build a hotel, we'll say, for example, if this certain requirement was laid on him. And number 5 is one that they feel is just so egregious a requirement that they would sue or some such sort of thing. So 1 to 5 in terms of how builders might well react to each one of these little statements, because I'm curious to see how much of this. I'm very sensitive to setting standards too high or too low, because too low, as I've often said, really nothing much changes, and many of the residents, if we start building hotels and not much has changed, they're not going to be happy with us. And on the other hand, if we have very aggressive standards that nobody builds, the developer community is not going to be happy with us either.
It's a balance for sure.
Yeah, so I'm just looking for, 1 through 5,
Well,
nothing more than.
can I actually respond to your question? Because I actually, we're beyond materials and colors, correct?
I'm talking about all the requirements.
I know, but are we finished with materials and colors? Does anybody have any other?
I just like to support the stucco, but not the cheapest of the synthetic, which is,
Yeah,
I think,
is there a
what
way-
Nora's getting at.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
We can write some language about that.
And then maybe there's, some other way to address Karen's, yeah.
I don't want to talk about a specific brand name, but there's got to be a
Yeah.
generic name for that system.
So to respond to what you were just alluding to, I'd like to pass out here, Ronnie. So I met with JJ, and this is his drawing, but my handwriting of the words. And do you want to give one to Joel and Carly to share?
Is there a way to get it up on a?
No.
Well, I could run up and scan it.
Well, I don't think, it's just a couple few sentences, but just for visual reference.
Just hold it.
I can hold it.
I'm sorry, who gave this to you?
So I met with JJ yesterday.
Oh, JJ, okay.
And he intends to comment. And I think we've had a lot of speculation regarding whether or not the development community would find the current proposed standards doable or outrageous, or like you said, your 1 to 5 scale.
Right.
Now that I've held it up, I gotta look at it. I'm just gonna look at it.
Okay.
So he started drafting, so this is the existing tram when you first come into town on the left. Does that make sense? The location of this development. And so I was kind of going through the standards that were being proposed by the Planning Commission and what was us. And he was sharing with me this vision that he has of the property where the tram would be revitalized, and it would take you up to a modest, 1,000 square foot restaurant, like in the existing building that's up there. And that there would be a developed community space in what is a natural amphitheater right next to it for music and for star viewing. So he was expressing this dark sky compliant, that it would be a very dark place up there, that there would be a trail, so there'd be recreation, that there would be a hotel as part of this big project, that the hotel, we talked about, I explained to him boutique, and he said, well, how many rooms? 20 rooms? Could I have 20 rooms? So he was very much understanding the smallness of scale that we were hoping to achieve. I drew a bike, and he said, yeah, it's on the bike path. So in terms of transportation opportunities, and then on the bottom left, you can see this shops, and he asked me to list the different sandwich shops in town, so I listed a few. But just that there would be, shops and food and office space and other commercial use. And he was also saying daycare, he continued to ask me, what does the council want? What does the council want? Because I'd like to build what the community and the council want to see. And so then when he laid this out and I listed all of our requirements, he said, well, this is great, and I'm gonna come to the public hearing and speak in favor of this proposed ordinance. So I just wanted to share the notes from our meeting and the sentiment from our meeting. I also talked to him about the 100% net renewable, perhaps 80% on site, which would reduce his footprint of his hotel and other office buildings. And he understood that concept, and so I just, like, if we're looking at like standards and we want to make standards super stiff, the standards that we're talking about right now seem doable, and they include small hotel that enables other space. But I think that this council also has been very responsive to the community, as the community's been saying, no more hotels. And we had that conversation with metering. So I just wanted to share that conversation because I wanted to at least give, and then also I wanted to point out that like the amount of commercial in this diagram exceeds the amount of overnight accommodation in size. So when we were talking about, oh, well, you know, when we were just saying, oh, well, if we had a city market sized, you know, the last workshop where we were calculating and saying, oh, maybe it should only be 5%. Well, if we're looking at a total project area, and this is a total project area, maybe we don't have to be as concerned about a requirement of, you know, 50% of the total project area must be commercial, not overnight accommodation, if that's really what we want to see. And then that opens the opportunity for mixed use, which we said was a priority in this process. So that's why I was just going to go back to the percent number. Not that I want to change what's happening yet, but that I want this to be of consideration, that that it would require hotel development to have a real requirement of mixed use. And then we say, well, are we gonna get sued? No, we have a hotel developer that's saying, that's what my project makeup, that's what I'd like to see in my project makeup, including this community space idea, which is actually, it was his idea before I even said, you know, well, we've been grappling with this idea of what is community space, civic space, what does it look like? To him, and for this development, it looks like an amphitheater that could be accessed for weddings, for theater, for music, and for dark sky viewing. And when he said dark sky, I was like, oh my gosh, this council's gonna love this idea, especially if it's up. You know, we don't want lights up there. So if it's designed for dark sky, it's like really thoughtful. And it's got a trail, so it's got this recreation element in it too, which we haven't even talked about, a recreation thing. So this is one developer and this is one parcel. And I know that certain parcels aren't going to be able to meet all of this, right? But I just wanted to share it because to me, I have felt all along that I don't mind another hotel if it brings so much more. And if it's modest in size, that it's not like, you know, continuing to explode our growth at an exponential rate.
We know, to Emily, expand on that. I sit with Preston Paxman on the water board. Preston's pretty easy to talk to. He's nice, you know, and I talked to him. I ran across him when I was on the county board, and Mr. Bynum, of course, along with JJ. And we're on the same sort. You can make your own 1 through 5 listing and pass the same piece of paper along to them and see what they market. We might learn some really interesting things. And I suspect in the process of doing that, these guys will suggest, well, that's not a bad idea, but here's a better way to do it, you know, kind of thing. Because I really think if they're in with us too, I mean, it's interesting because Karen and I were down at the Chamber of Commerce meeting, and they were talking about what do they call it, speed dating session for investors.
Right.
Okay. And another member,
having them
without
on Friday.
us saying a word, said, oh, I think this is a recipe for disaster because investors are coming in looking to build another hotel. And this lady said, the town doesn't need new hotels. That's what she said. They're on the same boat we are. They, as long as they can make a little money, they're happy to get away from hotels because they know that's what we need to. But yeah, check with those three guys, and that way we'll kind of roll them into the thought or planning process.
Yeah, I mean, we have been in contact with Amy, who represents Mike Bynum, but it's not a bad idea to reach out specifically
There you go.
to him.
Wait, isn't this the spot that, what is the, not,
I thought they were gonna do a creation museum,
Creationist
but
museum?
he said that was not happening.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad.
You can mandate that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, I mean, it's just, again.
He said
and I-
restaurant
Well,
instead
I
of.
appreciate you saying that because, coming here, it was, that discussion on Monday, it was like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be too much space. And then afterwards, it's like, wait, what would be wrong with having a Qdoba, a bike shop, and some other kind of restaurant or service that is, we're offering the community? I don't,
Right.
that isn't the worst case scenario. That's what the goal was of.
And
trying
it's
to-
totally lacking now for
And the-
people, cycling up and down that route. There
Yeah.
isn't really anywhere to stop, or if you even go walk across the bridge, there isn't really anything.
Oh, I will totally grab a sandwich right there on my way out. But the other thing that we talked about too, as I said, the energy requirement of 100% net renewable is really gonna limit your opportunity to do a pool, but an opportunity that is in our community are for the hotel to provide passes to the city pool. And he said, oh, that's great. That reduces the cost of operations.
Or brochures for the outfitters at the river, yeah.
But the takeaway that I had with him is not even just the layout of this. What it was his request to say, like, to me, what do you want? Put it on paper, and then let's find the right development partner that can meet these standards so that we can have a robust, diversified economy per project.
We're lucky in that we have local developers who really want to work with us toward the same goals.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nora.
Well, thanks for the input. We'll see how the public hearing goes, and then we'll regroup. And I'll send out various pieces of information that I've.
All right, is there a motion to recess?
Motion to recess until 6 o'clock?
Thanks, Karen. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Mike. All those in favor?
Aye.
We are recessed.